Hey everyone, today I wanted to give my review of The Dark Below. We're going to talk about everything that's happened over the past couple of weeks that the expansion has been out, and alright, let's go. So first off, I thought the story missions, as few as there were great. They were very challenging at level 30, but I thought they were great. The Fist of Crota mission was a little bit short, but the debuff where you couldn't use your movement skills was a nice touch and is promising for the future in terms of difficulty modifiers, although I realized it was a debuff, not a skull modification, but there's no reason they couldn't turn that into a skull modification. The whole vestige damage zones were cool, but they didn't really pose that much of a threat. I think if they spawned more often or ticked for more damage, even on the heroic versions, that would make it harder, but again, it's progress in terms of more modifiers. The additional quests beyond that were sort of like a mini story mission, a hunt for Crota's minions, which was a nice touch. I think my favorite thing, though, was the Urn of Sacrifice quest chain. The final mission that you do is so much fun. I really wish we could replay it. The quest chain is representative of how I think Bungie should start going in terms of these kind of quests, maybe even for exotics. The PvP maps are pretty good, no real complaints. I gave my thoughts on those in an earlier video before the expansion came out, but I really like the Cauldron the most. And I haven't really seen any complaints about the maps anyway, so let's move on. So, the Will of Crota, the main strike in the expansion, is what you would expect from a strike in Destiny, although it definitely seems a little bit harder than the others. However, it doesn't really do much to deviate from the formula of Destiny strikes. It is very similar in format compared to the others. I really would have liked to see Bungie take strikes a step farther in terms of introducing some interesting mechanics to fights like we see in the raid. It doesn't have to be a whole bunch, it can literally just be one or two different mechanics, but anything to spice up the strikes is very welcome. The Undying Mind, I think, is fun because of all the chaos. There's just so much stuff that you have to deal with, although I can definitely sympathize for those who may mock its lack of creativity in regards to mechanics. It's very much, here's a ton of enemies. Alright, you killed them. Alright, here's another ton of enemies. But, that seemed to be the theme of the expansion, although this strike is Vex-oriented and not Hive-oriented. Speaking of which, let's talk about Crota's End, the raid. Now, if you haven't done the raid yet and you want to keep your experience spoiler-free, you might want to skip ahead to the time on the screen in 3, 2, 1. Alright, so the raid was very well done yet again. I really enjoyed it. The Hive are very different from the Vex. The Vex are methodical and technical, which was very well represented in the Vault of Glass through heavy use of mechanics, something we didn't get to experience in the rest of the game. The Hive, on the other hand, are more brute force oriented. They simply want to overwhelm you as much as possible, which may have inspired the less mechanic based fights and more action and chaos based fights, although not random at all. Crota's End demands much more coordination between the entire group than Vault of Glass demanded, in my opinion. Crossing the bridge also acts like a tutorial for using the sword, although the Sword of Crota story mission did a pretty good job of that. Everyone needs to know how to use the sword, which is very helpful for Crota himself. It demands very heavy coordination from your team, but it's definitely not as mechanic heavy. The gauntlets and ear ute are obviously not mechanic heavy, and I wouldn't say Crota is mechanic heavy, but very coordination heavy. It's a lot of stuff happening at once, and everyone has a role. There's no heroes either. One person can't carry an entire raid or do the work of multiple people. The sword user relies on the group, who rely on the knight killer, who relies on the group, who relies on the sword user. If one piece falls, the entire group falls apart. One death at the wrong time makes the encounter very difficult, whereas with Atheon, if you had someone die, you could definitely still complete the encounter with no issues. With Crota, missing one wave of sword damage, at least at current levels of 30 and 31, means that you'll probably hit the enrage timer if you are not perfect otherwise. Now, I'm sure a good amount of you have heard about people soloing the raid. No breaking the fights, no breaking anything, just doing it legit. While I can respect the skill involved doing the raid solo, I definitely would like to try it myself, I don't think it should be possible to solo in the first place. That's just a personal opinion that will never be changed no matter the argument. I believe the raid should be the hardest thing in the game, it's not for everyone, and it's a place that's supposed to be respected in regards to difficulty. I'm not saying that soloing the raid is easy, but you know what I mean. It's kind of like how the Nightfall is now. I'm more than willing to bet that it's not supposed to be soloable, but the burn modifiers make it possible, but that's another story for another time. Yet again, people have found methods of cheesing and cheating the fights, to which I will say, you better start learning the fights legit, because it is going to get fixed. And let's be clear, the current cheese for Crota is not a cheese, it is breaking the network, and that is cheating. We are so far away from creative use of game mechanics at that point, and it's cheating, so don't kid yourselves. Let's also reestablish that the raid is supposed to be challenging. The raid is not a loot pinata like so many people think it is. Raid loot is supposed to be earned, not simply given out for buying the game. If your group can't do it, whether that's a skill reason, a time reason, that's not Bungie's problem, nor is it an excuse for Bungie to just dump loot on you. There's not supposed to be a, well, let's just break the fight and get our loot because we can't do it option. These issues are the exact reason that there's no hard mode at launch, and why there will likely never be hard mode launching at the same time as normal mode ever again. There's a responsibility on Bungie's end. Sure, they want to get rid of all the bugs, they should get rid of all the bugs, but there's also player responsibility. Speaking of hard mode, I'm incredibly worried about it being too easy. Right now, most groups who are completing the raid are doing it with full groups of level 31 players. The fight is tuned to level 32, so despite the fact that we're doing reduced damage to everything, we're still stomping the fight into the ground. Hard mode will be tuned to level 33, everyone's going to be level 32, so we'll still just be one level below what the fight is tuned to. This is assuming that hard mode Crota will be like Vault of Glass at 30, where everything is level 30, or in this case 33, and doesn't scale like normal mode did, normal starting with level 30 stuff and ending with level 32 stuff. You can see how that might be an issue if we're one level below now and kicking Crota's ass. Another issue I had with the raid is that it just got too easy too quickly. I don't know how this could be resolved for next time. It could just be that we're all very experienced now, we know what to expect. I don't know, but Crota went on farm status for my group after the first 3 or 4 days where everyone was gearing to level 31. Regardless, I was very pleased with the raid. I'm very glad they were able to reciprocate their success from Vault of Glass into Crota's End. However, there are plenty of issues I've noticed brought up from the community: the gear reset, the regrinding of weapons, lack of content, the weekly and nightfall being DLC content. Some stuff I absolutely agree with, others maybe not so much. The gear reset is probably the biggest complaint put forward. I'm going to quote my friend Leopard Stealth here because I think he puts it into words better than I attempted to when writing this video. Quote, while Destiny is a gear-based grinder, the lack of investment carryover from before the Dark Below makes this shooter bro not feel very legendary. All I have to show for my hours spent in Destiny are outclassed gear, materials, RNG upgradable exotics, my friends in clan, and thumb skill. I played first-person shooters for years with no in-game investment system in place. My investment was the skill I acquired and the friends that I made. Then Destiny comes along and tries to merge these genres, and it's abrasive. I've been pushing hard and have felt like I've fallen in the ranks of Guardians. I don't know how the game needs to be designed to make me feel more invested, but I think it has something to do with the feeling of investment lost. Now, before I start this next section, I just want to say that I'm not going to be arguing for or against anything unless explicitly stated. Otherwise, I'm just going to be talking about my observations. I can see why people are upset about the vendors giving out level 31 gear. It basically makes the Vault of Glass gear worthless. While old raid gear getting dumped for new raid gear is completely common in these kind of settings, it doesn't happen as quickly, nor does it become completely irrelevant. Don't get me wrong, it was good for the first groups going into Crota's End, but if you prepared properly, you could have been level 31 10 minutes after the expansion came out, making that raid gear useless. I think something might need to happen with the light level system because Bungie has certainly put themselves into a hole here, among other things. People have been saying that the grind is too much and or that it's a problem, not just with Destiny, but it's a very controversial issue in all grindy MMOE RPG games. The missions are too bland, the grind is too much. Go dig through R games on Reddit, and you'll find a lot of posts about this topic. The problem is that with every single one of these discussions, there's never an answer given that's actually feasible for the developers to do. The grind exists to keep people playing their games. So what about Destiny? A hot issue right now is in regards to the weapon upgrades at Xur, although this issue seemed to calm down as of late. The reason why Xur just doesn't give you a 331 exotic when you upgrade is because I think Bungie wants people to keep playing, similar to how people were getting exotics in vanilla Destiny. If they just gave you a fully upgraded weapon, you'd skip over a large part of that particular grind, getting the best weapons. It's the same thing with armor. I'm not trying to say that grinding is the best way to do things, but they do need to give a reason for people to keep playing, and upgrading your weapons and armor like that is fine with me. Here's another thing I'm sure isn't helping the anger towards the expansion. Destiny is being marketed purely as a shooter. It always has been. Never has the RPG side really been embraced at all in marketing. So you're pulling people who enjoy games like Call of Duty, Battlefield, Far Cry, Halo, but you're throwing them into this semi-RPG format which those people might not be used to. Those people aren't used to their stuff now suddenly being less good and having to go get better stuff, which is where I think a lot of the frustration is stemming from as well. I understand that marketing the game as a shooter is helpful sales-wise. You want to capture a wide audience, but the fact that the RPG investment side has essentially been ignored in marketing is a little bit dishonest. This isn't really a Bungie issue. They don't really handle the marketing, at least that's what I've been led to believe. I guess this is more of an Activision thing. I think expansion was also not the best terminology for what we got, because what do you think of when you hear expansion? You probably think World of Warcraft. And World of Warcraft gives you new zones, new factions, higher level cap, new story, and while Destiny did some of that, I don't think it was enough to call it a full-blown expansion. I think something like content update would have been better. I'm going to leave these notes at that for now, though, because I'd rather not have this video go 30 minutes long, and because I know absolutely nothing about marketing. A couple of other things were stuff like VOG itself going completely obsolete, and the expansion being part of the weekly rotation. While I'm used to raids coming and going with each new patch and expansion, for a game like Destiny, I wouldn't mind seeing a higher level version of Vault of Glass with either some skull modifiers or increased level difficulties. I don't know what the rewards would be either. I don't know if Radiant materials should be offered or not, but I wouldn't mind seeing the ability to get gear that gives you level 31 instead of 30 like it used to be. The Vault of Glass weapons I don't mind being replaced by the new Crota's End weapons, although I will say that many people are very fond of the Vault of Glass weapons, and rightfully so. They're all very good. I will say that I still use some of my Vault of Glass weapons in the new raid. They're still fantastic weapons. I use Vision of Confluence mainly for Crota, so don't feel like you need to dismantle your Vault of Glass stuff. Obviously, the Crota weapons will become the stuff to use once hard mode opens, but you're going to need stuff to do hard mode with, and the Vault of Glass stuff is working just fine right now, although obviously having 331 weaponry is the ideal. As for the exotics in Vault of Glass dropping as the old versions, I wouldn't mind seeing those old versions bumped up to the new versions, as you can get the new versions of exotics from doing much easier content, so why not Vault of Glass as well? Another issue was that, for example, the first week, the Heroic was the new strike, the Will of Crota, and if you chose not to buy the expansion, you could not do that week's Nightfall or weekly Heroic. While I don't mind having the expansion be part of the weekly rotations, I think there needs to be a secondary option for those unable or unwilling to buy the expansion. If you're unwilling to buy the expansion, yet you're still interested enough in Destiny to play it, I think that's a little weird, but there are plenty of people unable to buy it for whatever reasons, and for them, the system is a little bit rigged. I think that if that's going to happen, you need to have the strike available to those without the expansion as to not leave them out. I'm sure there's issues on Bungie's end somehow, but there needs to be a happy medium. Another thing was the Commendations, the things that you need to buy the new Vanguard and Crucible gear. The reason why this was done was because if it wasn't, literally everyone who saved 200 marks of each could deck themselves out in level 31 capable gear, turn in a bunch of bounties across multiple characters, and hit 31 in a matter of 10 minutes. Despite Bungie's best efforts, it was totally still possible to do this anyway, although it required a little more planning. I don't really have an opinion on if this was good or bad or not, just trying to talk about maybe why they did it. It doesn't really seem to be a huge issue now, though. Finally, really would have liked to see more cutscenes. I know we had the cinematic trailer for the launch of the expansion, but more in-game cutscenes, please. People really like them, especially with the lackluster story right now. I know the Dark Below attached everything together with the Crota storyline, but cutscenes, make them. This time it's forgivable because by the time that they got the feedback that we wanted more story, I'm sure the Dark Below content was probably nearing completion and was going into testing phases. I can't imagine it's easy to put that kind of stuff into the game that quickly. But if there's anything people want the absolute most, it's more storytelling. Yet again, the Grimoire cards are super interesting. Put it in the game. Should you buy the expansion? Well, if you want to keep playing the game, you kind of need to. I think it is worth it for the raid alone if you're a raider, especially if you're going in blind, which I highly, highly, highly encourage whenever a new raid comes out. Nothing is going to beat the satisfaction of clearing the new content without previous knowledge and learning those fights on your own. I would gladly pay $20 for a raid, just the raid, to get that sense of happiness after hours and hours and hours when you finally bring down the final boss. That's why I play these kind of games. The story missions were fun, the new strikes were difficult, there's plenty new gear to obtain. I think that what we ended up getting was good, but yet again, Destiny's main problem is not having enough. That's all we want, is more. More missions, more strikes, more areas to explore. Once again, I will continue to support this game because I know it can get to a place we all want it to be in. All we need is more. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the expansion and the raid, looking to get your thoughts as well. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope you have a great holiday.